Number 10. Venom's deadly French kiss. Venom is already known for being a brutal and twisted character in general, especially when he acts as a villain, yet he's still one of the most popular characters around, no matter his alignment. In 2003's Venom in issue 11, we saw him take on the Thing from the Fantastic Four, and use a weird talent we didn't really need to know that he had. Venom is attempting to drag away Spider-Man's unconscious body when the Thing bursts through a wall, aiming to prevent him from doing so by tackling him. Venom responds by telling the Thing it's blobberin' time and shoots out his tongue, essentially giving the Thing an immobilizing and disturbingly painful looking French kiss. Fortunately, Human Torch comes in on the next page to put a stop to Venom, but this graphic image won't be as easily burned away. In fact, just the opposite. It'll be burned into your mind. The cover of this issue says it all, featuring just Venom's long and slimy looking tongue. Ew. Number 9. Loki and Thor brutalize the Fantastic Four. This one came to us from a What If story where we saw both Loki and Thor team up to take on Marvel's first family, the Fantastic Four. During this fight, we got a brutal moment where Ben Grimm as the Thing tries to shout out his famous catchphrase while battling Thor. It's clobberin' time! But before he can get that final word out, time, Thor smashes his jaw off with his hammer. Youch. Meanwhile, Invisible Woman Sue Storm is also in trouble. She is attempting to protect herself using a force field she created, but Loki reverses the polarity of her powers, so all the energy she is projecting outward instead folds in on her, causing her to be crushed beneath its weight and looking almost skeletal as a result in one panel. She's like, I'm dying. Number 8. Gamora kills Eros. In a surprising turn of events, Gamora was forced to take the life of her uncle Star Fox following the revelation that the Black Order would be using him and not Gamora, as he had previously thought, to bring Thanos back to life. Much to the dismay of Star-Lord, Gamora did not hesitate to kill her uncle Eros, Thanos' brother, though at least she did seem sorry to have to do it. But if it meant preventing Thanos' return, well, then she was more willing to do the deed, stabbing Star Fox right through the chest with her sword. Number 7. Kitty is forced to kill Wolverine. Kitty's kills can be pretty gruesome when they happen because of her phasing powers. In this story, Kitty was forced to kill Wolverine when he couldn't be saved from being used as Hydra's brainwashed agent in What If Wolverine Enemy of the State. Wolverine has been teleporting in, assassinating tons of Hydra's opponents, aka superheroes, and teleporting out. A team is then pulled together to finally take him down, and one of that team's members, Kitty, is one of the few left at the end. She tries to reason with Wolverine, but when that fails is forced to phase her arm through his head, turning it solid just before Wolverine slices it off. Wolverine is dead, Kitty's without an arm, and likely every reader was either left with a shocked look on their face or tears in their eyes, or both. Number 6. She-Hulk tears Vision in half. This was during one of the times in Marvel history where Scarlet Witch basically went crazy, believing the whole world to be against her and taking it out on them. During the Avenger Disassembled storyline, she was blaming the Avengers for the loss of her children, which she had altered reality to create, as, you know, Vision, her husband, was not actually capable as an artificial life form of fathering children. Wanda decided to attack the Avengers, but indirectly. She appeared to send an altered Vision to do so instead. Her influence also caused She-Hulk to go into an uncontrollable rage. When this happened, She-Hulk saw Vision as the main threat and so ripped him in half. Of course, Vision would later return. This definitely wasn't the end for him, and the two would even reconcile. But just seeing this happen in the pages of a comic was still pretty intense. Anytime someone gets ripped in half, it's pretty intense.
Number 5. Homelander. The result of Vought American's Compound V experiments, Homelander is a narcissistic psychopath with all the powers of Superman, and is considered the most powerful man alive in the boys' universe. While he is the antagonist of both the comics and the series, he is technically a superhero, even if in occupation only. Homelander is extremely powerful, but considers himself above humanity, and thinks himself invincible, often using his powers to horrifically kill people who get in his way, annoy him, or even just happen to be at the wrong place at the wrong time when Homelander is bored. Some of his more brutal murders include him dooming an entire airplane filled with civilians, taking off the vice president's head, and in one issue, flying a family and their car into the sky before dropping it. He is probably the most sadistic character on this list, but since he is only considered a superhero by technicality, I put him right in the middle of the list. Number 4. Lobo. Although Although this space bounty hunter is more often villainous than heroic, his time on the Justice League makes me comfortable giving him a spot on this list. Lobo is the last of his own species because he destroyed everyone else in what he called a science project. He gave himself an A, by the way. In his years of bounty hunting, he has destroyed several planets and countless lives, and has shown little in the way of remorse. Like Homelander, he is on this list near the middle because though he has technically operated as a superhero, there is very little about him that is actually heroic. Number 3. Ghost Rider. Johnny Blaze is a motorcycle stuntman who, in an effort to save his surrogate father, Crash Simpson, from dying of cancer, made a deal with the demon Mephisto. Mephisto promised to cure Crash's cancer in exchange for Johnny's services. Unfortunately, Crash perished in a stunt gone wrong almost immediately afterwards, and Johnny became Ghost Rider, becoming bound to the spirit of vengeance, Zarathos. When transformed into the Rider, he has super strength, is essentially immune to damage, and can manipulate hellfire. Perhaps most iconic is his penance stare, which causes its victims to experience every bit of pain they have ever inflicted on other people, resulting in guilt, pain, and trauma. In one of the most brutal examples of the penance stare's power, Ghost Rider used it on a man who then broke his own neck with his bare hands to end the pain. Number 2. The Punisher. Frank Castle was a Marine whose family was killed in the crossfire of a mob attack. Frank survived but was deeply traumatized, and when his family's killers went free due to police corruption, he decided to take matters into his own hands. He became the Punisher and began using his military skills and tactics to wage a brutal one-man war on crime. His extreme methods have brought him into frequent conflict with both the villains and the heroes of the Marvel Universe. Frank has no personal life to speak of, and tends to avoid friendships in general, choosing to spend all of his time plotting, hunting, or killing criminals. He is a lunatic with nothing to lose, but fortunately for the good people of the Marvel Universe, all of his insane fury is directed at the criminals of the city. Some of his more brutal kills include feeding a man to polar bears at the zoo, using his obese friend to smother the Russian, or kicking a limbless crime boss into a raging fire. Number 1. The Spectre. The spirit of vengeance in the DC universe first appeared in More Fun Comics number 52. He was originally a demon called Aztar, who was helping Lucifer try and take control of heaven. He eventually had a change of heart and surrendered to the Archangel Michael. As a means of atonement, his memory and consciousness were wiped, and he was transformed into the Spectre. He is a divinely powered being capable of almost anything he can imagine, can travel between dimensions, and can shoot energy blasts. He's immortal and capable of flight, intangibility, possession, telepathy, and telekinesis, just to name a few of his powers. In order to temper this power, he must be bonded to a human host, with this most often being Jim Corrigan. Spectre has no limit to his power, but is bound by the morality of the host, who often prevents him from unleashing the full wrath of God upon his enemies. He has killed people by aging them to death, melting them, cutting them in half with giant scissors, turning a man into a sentient and feeling mannequin who was then dumped in a fire and painfully burnt. He turned a bunch of junkies into his fingertips and then injected them with liquid fire, and in one extreme case, burnt down an entire country.
Kicking off the list at number 10. Wolverine vs. Hulk. This one is wild, okay? We all know Wolverine is ripped, and he gets really ripped in this one. And I don't mean ripped like jacked either, I mean ripped like in half. This one comes from Wolverine vs. Hulk, and it's more than brutal. So in this story, Wolverine is sent to Tibet to assassinate the Hulk. The problem is, he's the Incredible Hulk, so it may sound easier than it looks. So when the battle between these two started up, it's loud, it's messy, and it's going to be pretty violent. Hulk picked Wolverine up and literally broke him into two, tossing his lower half up a mountain and leaving Wolverine's torso bleeding in the snow down below. Just another day in the Ultimates, you know? Being the world's greatest tracker and all, Wolverine smelt his legs that were a few miles up the mountain and then did a really slow, really painful climb to get those smelly feet back where they belong. The series was actually delayed in real life, so this journey up the mountain to get his legs back took 3 years for readers to finally see. Imagine if you had to wait that long to see the next episode after like a Breaking Bad finale or something. 3 years? That's insane. I couldn't do it. And before we head over to number 9, guys, if you wanted to go ahead and give us a thumbs up for this video, that would be great. It helps out the studio a lot. You guys are the best. Thank you so much for watching. Now let's dive back into this list. Number 9, Batman vs. Bane. Directed by, of course, Christopher Nolan, who had done the previous installments, comes a pretty epic conclusion to the Dark Knight trilogy. Released in 2012, The Dark Knight Rises, as you can guess from the title alone, is about Batman rising up. From where? Why? What's going on? Well, how about a broken back thanks to Bane? So this is 8 years after the Joker had a run-in with Gotham City. So now Batman has returned to take down Tom Hardy as he mumbles and frowns aggressively in this film. We get one of my favorite fight scenes from any superhero movie. And what I love about this scene so much is that there's no music to it at all. All you hear is Batman legitimately struggling to try and fight this dude. And it makes it more realistic. It's stressful, and you can see Bruce become more and more exhausted by each punch. And it all comes to a screeching halt when Bane picks up Bruce for one last blow, right to the spinal cord.
Spirit! Oh, your buddy!
Now, I know people like to give this movie a hard time, but seeing Batman get his ass kicked like this reminds me that it's not always the hero that gets the last punch. Number 8, Magneto vs. Wolverine. Look, I'll be honest, I'm a nail biter, okay? And there's days where I can't even muster up the strength to pull a hangnail out of my own finger or whatever. It sucks, I can't deal with pain, especially when something's coming out of my body, which makes the next one on this list really brutal for me to read. Now, I couldn't imagine if all my bones were suddenly ripped out of my body. That's a nightmare. And that's exactly what happens to Wolverine when Magneto has had enough of his nonsense. Yeah, this all takes place during the Fatal Attractions event. So Wolverine doesn't even have a chance to scream. The adamantium that bonded to his bones erupted outwards like water bursting through a dam. And he's still breathing when this happens. I mean, if this isn't one of the worst things to go through, I couldn't tell you what is. Definitely not one of my hangnails. This one is probably a little bit more painful. Thankfully, Xavier wiped Magneto's memory of the whole event, and Wolverine was out of commission for a while recovering. I mean, he had mental spikes sticking out of his body. I don't think he's gonna get any chores done in the meantime. Number 7, The Avengers vs. Thanos. The Russo brothers came in the MCU with the Winter Soldier, and we got that sick, awesome elevator scene, and then we got Civil War. They make some pretty fun movies. My personal favorite of the bunch is still Infinity War. I mean, all these characters who led their own franchise crammed into one single movie shouldn't have worked out as well as it did. It's a smooth flick. So we see Thanos as he walks his way through the universe collecting the cosmic Infinity Stones. First, he decimates Xandar for the Power Stone, gave Loki the old 1-2 choke for the Space Stone, and then he punched the Hulk so hard in the neck that he quit being the Hulk. And this is like the first 10 minutes of the movie. So the movie itself is a brutal fight, but of course it comes down to the last stone, the last attempt. The Mind Stone. The stone that is Vision. It's in his forehead. So after a last effort attempt of removing the stone in Wakanda, Wanda Maximoff is forced to destroy it. So while she's working on that, all of our Avengers are getting destroyed by the powers that Thanos now obtains, but they don't come out on top in this one. Vision gets that big yellow blackhead pulled right out of his forehead, and then the theater sat silent, and we just watched Vision's lifeless and colorless body fall to the ground. Seeing the Avengers lose like this, especially Vision, was definitely one of the more brutal beatdowns in an MCU movie. Number 6, Knull vs. Thor. Spoilers coming in hot for King in Black by Donny Cates, okay, just so you guys are aware. So during the first battle with Knull and his army of symbiotes, Thor was not to be found. The God of Thunder would be a perfect fight considering the weakness of the Horde being electricity and magic. Kinda makes sense. He'd be a pretty reliable chess piece to this violent game, no doubt about it. So when the God of Thunder finally arrived in issue 3 of King in Black, he brought a pretty epic battle with him. So Knull had come to Earth with his thousands of symbiote dragons, searching for Eddie Brock's son, Dylan. Searching for you, Dylan, they're coming, man. And when he finally got a hold of Eddie, he stripped him of the symbiote and dropped him from the Empire State Building. Things are looking not so great. And then Thor returns finally in the next issue. So you're a god and a king, Thor asks. Good for you. Now allow me to teach you what those words truly mean. And he does just that. Of course, with the help of Tony riding in on an extremis infected symbiote, it's just another week and a bit and we'll see this epic battle continue with issue 4. But so far, it's up to a crazy, crazy awesome start.
Number 5. Hulk gets indigestion. In the alternate timeline that belongs to Old Man Logan, we witness a potential future where Logan lives on land with his wife and 2 children that is owned by the Hulk gang. The Hulk gang are multiple generations of Hulk's inbred family. Bruce himself is still alive and demands doubled rent from the Logans. Old Man Logan sets out to collect this rent before the due date when his family is threatened, but unfortunately does not make it back in time, despite him actually arriving early in regards to their originally agreed upon date. Logan finds his family has already been killed in his absence and sets out hell-bent on revenge. Unfortunately, Logan doesn't seem to be much of a match for Hulk, who devours him. Of course, Logan may have actually been counting on that happening. While Hulk's body attempts to digest him, Logan pops his claws and cuts his way out of Hulk's stomach. We've seen Wolverine attempt this move a couple of times in the comics, but it doesn't get any less gruesome anytime he does it, especially with Steve McNiven on pencils. Number 4. Nova brutally disembowels Annihilus. This has got to be one of the most violent kills we've seen in the pages of a Marvel comic. During Annihilation in issue 6, we saw Nova, aka Richard Rider, take on Annihilus and succeed in defeating him. But he didn't just defeat him, he disemboweled him. And not in a conventional way either, but by reaching down his throat. That's right, the brutal and violent end happened by Nova punching down into Annihilus's throat, so far in fact that he somehow reached his organs. I don't know how that scientifically works, but there you go. And he pulled specifically what appeared to be his intestines out through his mouth. Quite intense. I don't think you can actually do that to someone, but I'm not gonna ask if it's possible because I don't want to know. Number 3. Wolverine kills everyone. Not intentionally though. In this instance, he was tricked. During Mark Millar's Old Man Logan limited series, it was revealed that Mysterio tricked Wolverine into killing nearly everyone in the X-Mansion. The staff, the students, his fellow colleagues, the X-Men. There were even more deaths as the supervillains took over the world, leaving us with the dystopian future that we see in this series, but by far the thought of Wolverine slicing up everyone that he ever considered to be close enough to consider family, believing they were intruders and that he was protecting his own fellow mutants in doing so, is shocking. Also just him holding Jubilee, I was like, no! Number 2. Black Panther becomes zombie food. In the Marvel Zombies world, Black Panther was one of the sole survivors when the zombies first attacked and turned most of his friends into zombified versions of themselves. One such former friend, Hank Pym, actually just managed to trick T'Challa into coming with him. Or, well, he almost did. He just almost. So close. Either way, Hank managed to incapacitate T'Challa, having already begun to change himself. He used Black Panther, his friend, as a food source, keeping him locked away and alive, sawing off pieces of him and slowly devouring him. Fortunately, Black Panther would escape and even become the leader of a land of survivors, although he would eventually turn into a zombie himself much later on. But that's a story for another time. Number 1. Pop goes Doctor Strange. Or his head. Ew. For this gory moment, we head to Ultimatum. I know, I'm sorry, but sometimes we gotta go back there. Now in Ultimatum, Doctor Strange took on an enemy that we've seen in battle multiple times before in the comics, Dormammu, and usually win against Dormammu even, but not this time. This time it was Dormammu who reigned victorious after using Doctor Strange's cape to strangle him to death by wrapping tightly around him. So tight in fact that Strange's head exploded. There are a lot of cons for wearing capes in a fight in terms of practicality, I know this, but this has got to be one of the most horrific instances of one that I've ever seen in the comics.
Number 10. Batman. Batman is perhaps the poster boy for miserable superheroes. When he was a child, he of course saw his parents die in front of him, causing him to vow to protect Gotham City from crime as Batman. Batman has witnessed many tragedies during his time in the cowl and has had his fair share of horrible things happen to him, such as losing one of his sons, Jason, as well as his father figure and faithful butler, Alfred. He has also had to deal with several horrible injuries, such as being repeatedly shot and stabbed, and having his back broken. He also got left at the altar on his wedding day, which was not great for his mental health, I'm sure. Despite being a character who is very much defined by what he has lost, he has probably gained more over the years. He has a massive family of both biological and adopted children, and has an extensive collection of allies and friends. On top of this, most of the things that he has lost have come back to him over the years. He lost Jason Todd, but he returned to life. The same thing happened when he lost Damian Wayne or Stephanie Brown. Out of all the major losses, the only ones that have stuck are his parents and Alfred. And let's face it, Alfred coming back is only a matter of time. Batman's life is better than he lets on. and he's probably just depressed, which is why he's at the bottom of this particular list. Number 9. Angel. Warren Worthington III was one of the original X-Men, having giant bird wings that allowed him to fly as Angel. He spent years as a hero until the Mutant Massacre. He was captured by the Marauders, who then cut off his wings and crucified him. This caused him to spiral into an awful depression, which eventually led to him trying to take his own life. This was prevented when Apocalypse showed up and made Angel an offer. He would give him back his wings if Angel would become one of the Horsemen of the Apocalypse, the Archangel of Death. This got him his wings back, but caused a host of other problems, with him having to work to resist the evil force that was put inside him ever since. Number 8. Scarlet Witch. Wanda Maximoff has gone back and forth between hero and villain during her many years at Marvel Comics, with her being responsible for a lot of horrible things that have happened, such as the infamous No More Mutants thing, but that is not to say that she hasn't had a somewhat tragic life herself. Things didn't get off to a good start when she was kidnapped from her mother as a baby by the High Evolutionary, who experimented on her to give her powers. While staying with old H.E., a demon named Chthon chose her to be his vessel, trying to possess her multiple times. She tried to put out a fire in her village with her powers, and people assumed that she was the one who started it and attacked her. This led to her being saved by Magneto and joining the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants. She eventually became an Avenger and married her teammate Vision. She used her powers to create a pair of twin boys for her to raise. This made reality unstable, and Wanda was forced to give them up, and they faded from existence. This led her down a dark road where bad stuff continued to both happen to her and because of her. She has had a far from easy life. Number 7. Spider-Man. Spider-Man lost his parents when he was a young boy, and he was sent to live with his aunt and uncle. When he developed spider powers, he chose not to stop a criminal who went on to kill his Uncle Ben, and as a result, he became a superhero with a guilt complex named Spider-Man. Spider-Man has certainly had his fair share of losses with his parents, his uncle, and his first great love, Gwen Stacy, who got thrown off a bridge and died from whiplash when Peter tried to catch her with a web line. He's had some major wins as well though, having dated some of the most absurdly attractive women in comics and getting married to his perfect partner, Mary Jane Watson. Although, this was undone in a deal with a demon in order to save Peter's Aunt May. Since then, it's been a downward spiral, with Marvel editorial seemingly being unwilling for Peter to grow as a person. They let him and Mary Jane become pregnant, but then made the child a miscarriage at the last minute. They undid his marriage, they made him the head of a big company which he then lost. He became a teacher but was fired. It seems like any time he's about to move into a new era, something happens that makes him single, broke, and taking pictures of himself for the Bugle for money. He has a less intense series of losses than a lot of the others on this list, but it's just a constant stream of pain and anguish for the poor guy. Sometimes to the point that it doesn't even make sense. He recently broke up with Mary Jane, and 6 months later, she's with some guy named Paul, and some kids are calling her mommy. Spider-Man is known for having a rough life, but Marvel needs to let him be happy for a bit, just for something different. Number 6. Daredevil. Daredevil is another character who almost notoriously can't seem to catch a break. When he was a child, Matt Murdock was in an accident that caused a radioactive isotope to get in his eyes, blinding him. It also gave him heightened senses and amazing abilities, but life wasn't through with him yet. His father was a boxer who refused to throw a fight, for which he was killed, leaving Matt with no family to speak of. He became Daredevil as well as a lawyer, but it has been far from an easy gig. One of his loves, Elektra, was killed by the villain Bullseye. As if that wasn't bad enough, Bullseye would later end the life of Matt's other great love, Karen Page. Speaking of Karen, she was an addict who sold Daredevil's secret identity for a fix, which allowed the Kingpin to systematically destroy Matt's life. It eventually got back on track, and Elektra eventually returned to life, but Matt has had to deal with his secret identity getting leaked constantly, getting possessed by a demon that made him murder people, being sent to prison multiple times, and having an almost constant tension with the people who care about him. On top of all of that, he has massive Catholic guilt, which just makes everyone feel worse.
Number 5. Spider-Man vs. Morlun. It's all fun and games until somebody gets poked in the eye. Or maybe if you're Spider-Man, it's all fun and games until you get your eye yanked out. Perhaps one of the worst things I can imagine. In the Spider-Man storyline, The Other, Evolve or Die, we see Spider-Man go toe-to-toe with Morlun, and he gets his butt kicked. It gets so bad that Spider-Man actually breaks his knuckles while he's trying to fight this dude. That's how intense this battle already is. Things, of course, take a horrible turn for the worse when Morlun decides to grab Spider-Man's left eye and then yank. No, he didn't, Spider-Man says. Oh, yes, he did. I said out loud on the bus in front of people. Dude, he pulled his eyeball out, and then to make us feel even more sick than we already do, Morlun proceeds to eat his eyeball, and he even commented on how delicious it was. But if I could ask one question, do the eye colors matter when it comes to like eyeball flavor? Like I got brown eyes, maybe that's like a maple-y kind of smoky kind of vibe. I don't know, maybe my eyes are pretty yummy. Somebody ask Army Hammer, see what he thinks about eyes. Number 4, Hulk versus everybody. Okay, this one's pretty wild. So Thor Ragnarok was loosely based off of the Planet Hulk storyline. And I say loosely because in the comics, well, that story didn't end up going so well. See, on Sakaar, the rocket that he arrived in ended up blowing to smithereens, causing some casualties that left him a little heartbroken, to say the least. So he rolls his shoulders back a few times, and then he heads back to Earth, and thus begins the World War Hulk storyline. He just destroys everybody. I mean, all the heroes that Earth loves at this point, just in the path of this death train. Like he locks the Illuminati in Madison Square Garden, and then he makes them fight to the death. That in itself is brutal. That's crazy. But I mean, I guess if you spend enough time on Sakaar, that just becomes second nature, you know? The whole story is a bloody good mess. I mean, it's great seeing the panic on the Avengers' faces this entire time. It's scary. So make sure if you haven't already to grab all 5 issues of 2007's World War Hulk, because it's a treat. The whole thing's a big battle. Number 3, Spider-Man Close to Home. So when a supervillain escapes, it's not a great time. Usually they're gonna come back for the person that put them in there in the first place. So Ultimate Spider-Man's death is absolutely beautiful, and of course it's really, really sad. It's done really well. So after tackling Captain America and literally taking a bullet for him, Peter is left to fight the Green Goblin, Electro, Sandman, Vulture, and Kraven. They're all waiting for him. They all wanted a piece of the spider, and in the end, they got what they wanted. The entire climax happens in Peter's neighborhood, basically. So everybody's running to safety and he's limping around. He's doing his absolute best. He's pulling off fire hydrants and using Electro's current to do some damage to other guys. He's giving it everything he's got. And that's the beauty of this one. He's exhausted from the start. He gets shot before this fight even happens. And you feel it while you're reading it. This is a plot that I think we're gonna finally see in the next Spider-Man movie. I mean, hopefully. With all these villains knowing Peter's true identity now, we could get them all literally showing up at his house, bringing the battle to him. Let's just hope it doesn't end the same way with Peter's heroic death. See, Miles actually saw this whole fight take place, so it actually inspired him to take on the mantle of Spider-Man. So these villains may have won this time, but Miles Morales is coming for you. Number 2, Deadpool kills the Marvel Universe. This issue was released in August 2012, and it is exactly what it sounds like. So what's the story here? Why does Wade want everybody dead? Well, the X-Men put Wade into the Ravencroft Asylum in attempts to heal his insanity, but the doctor wasn't too good at handling a task because the doctor was actually Dr. Psycho Man. So the procedure went well, I'd say. You know, something happened. He brainwashed Wade in hopes to shut down all these inner voices, and well, it worked. Awesome, hooray, there we go. It worked, but the only downside was those voices were now replaced with voices that were encouraging him to kill everybody in the Marvel Universe. And this is a must read. From start to finish, it is brutal, it is graphic, it's an easy one on this list. Number 1, Iron Man vs. Captain America. Seeing 2 of your friends argue is uncomfortable enough, let alone seeing 2 of your superhero friends try and kill each other. Captain America Civil War is one of my favorite Marvel movies to watch, because when these guys finally battle it out, there's years of history behind it. Captain America Civil War was released in 2016, directed again by the Russo brothers, and the whole movie is politics. It's superhero politics, like in the comic, minus, you know, most things from the comic. Like the school blowing up, for instance. Let's leave that part out of this movie. But in the film adaptation, Tony sides with the government and the Sokovia Accords. He feels responsible for the death of Charles Spencer, or rather with the whole weekend of Ultron stuff. Steve wants to protect Bucky, and freedom throughout the entire team definitely wouldn't hurt either. So eventually, due to Baron Zemo's sneaky little snake work, he gets Tony in the same room as Steve, and we see footage of a brainwashed Bucky kill Tony's parents. The next 10 minutes are just filled with them both trying to end each other. Tony even blasted Bucky's arm off during this fight. He's going for blood. So Cap decides last minute to stick the shield in Tony's suit, and that shield Tony made very clear didn't belong to Cap, and that it belonged to his father.
Coming in at number 10 is Zur-En-Arrh. The Batman of Zur-En-Arrh was introduced in 1958's Batman number 113 as Plano, who protects a faraway planet in a red, yellow, and purple Batman-inspired suit. While a dazed Batman pilots the Batplane over Gotham City one night, he finds himself transported to the world of Zur-En-Arrh by Plano. Bruce helps Plano fight off alien invaders with Superman-like powers, and it's transported back to Earth. Now, fast forward to Grant Morrison's run on Batman, and the whole adventure was revealed to be a hallucination caused by an isolation experiment on Bruce Wayne by the villain Dr. Simon Hurt, with Zur-En-Arrh being derived from Bruce Wayne mistaking his father's last words, Zorro in Arkham, the film they had just watched before his parents were brutally snatched away from him. Using the trigger phrase, Dr. Hurt broke Bruce's mind and left him on the streets of Gotham. However, Bruce had developed a backup personality to bring the fight back to Dr. Hurt, the much more violent Batman of Zur-En-Arrh. And at number 9 is Batman White Knight. Batman White Knight does something rather unique. It takes the arch enemy of Batman, the Joker, and flips him to become the hero of Gotham, but not one that wears a mask or runs around beating up criminals in the night. A hero who stands in the public eye and fights for what's right. Mostly. The story really paints Batman out to be as brutal and terrifying as he tries to be, and it's pretty successful. The best example I can give is how the Joker actually became reformed in the first place. In the very first issue of the comic, Batman is chasing Joker alongside Barbara Gordon, Batgirl, and Nightwing, and he is single-minded, driving the Batmobile over people's roofs and through active construction zones, barging past security guards who just want to help. Normally Batman is pretty good at not letting the Joker talk him into a frenzy, but this time it ain't gonna go that well. When Joker torments Batman, then reveals he is taking a new medication to cure his mental illness, Batman snatches the whole bottle, and in front of a large group of onlookers, he empties the whole bottle into the Joker's mouth and forces him to swallow it. Number 8. Bane. There are many deranged and off-the-wall villains in Batman's rogues gallery, and while the Dark Knight has suffered losses and defeats at the hands of a few, none of those defeats are as infamous as the ones he suffered at the hands of Bane. By issue 11 of the Broken Bat part of the Nightfall arc, Bane had managed to find out that Bruce Wayne was indeed Batman. Bane surprised Bruce at his home, pumped himself with venom, and laid a brutal beatdown on the Dark Knight in his own home. The fight continued on into the Batcave, and completely taken by surprise, Batman is on his last legs when the venom-fueled tank of a man lifted Batman over his head and dropped him spine first onto his massive back-breaking knee. This brutal move, captured in one of the most iconic comic panels ever, put the Batman completely out of commission, requiring him to choose another to fill his role as the protector of Gotham until he could make his triumphant return. Coming up at number 7, Alfred. Bane broke the Dark Knight's back all the way back in Nightfall, but I think it was his attempt to break Batman's spirit that was the most despicably brutal moment for this character. After Flashpoint Batman organized a takeover of the city of Gotham, Batman and his Bat family were forced out of the city. Its perimeter was guarded, and Alfred Pennyworth was taken as a hostage. In an attempt to rescue Alfred, Batman sent Damian Wayne Robin. Unfortunately, Damian was not quite capable of getting the job done, but that doesn't mean that he deserved to be forced to watch as Bane snapped the neck of Alfred Pennyworth, sending the heart of the Bat family to his grave. Instead of actually serving to break the Batman spirit like he intended to, Bane actually pushed Batman to do practically whatever it takes to put Bane down. If anything, this act united the Bat family as a force to be reckoned with, and there was no way Bane or the alternate Thomas Wayne were going to get away with this heinous crime. And at number 6 is his one rule. Batman Hush could in its entirety be seen as a brutal moment. It strikes at the childhood life of Bruce Wayne himself, pushing Batman to a point we rarely ever see. In Batman issue number 614, right smack dab in the middle of the Hush story arc, Tommy Elliot, the childhood friend of Bruce Wayne, loses his life at what seems to be the hands of the Joker. All the years and years of distress caused by the Joker, the people hurt, the lives lost, they all fuel this rage inside of Bruce Wayne, who begins to lay a spectacular beatdown on the Joker, knocking out both Harley Quinn and even Catwoman, who both try to stop him. Batman almost goes to the point of permanently bringing an end to the Joker, beginning to put aside his morals to finally be rid of this homicidal plague on Gotham City. It's not until Jim Gordon intervenes while Batman has his gloves around the Joker's neck that the Dark Knight finally relents. The worst part is that if Batman did go through with it, the Joker wasn't even the one responsible for the crime he thought he was responsible for.
Number 5. Martian Manhunter. Martian Manhunter's life since he came to Earth has been pretty good, all things considered, but his backstory is just so brutal that it earns him a spot on this list. John Jones was born on the planet Mars, where he lived with his wife and daughter. This idyllic life came to an end when John's evil twin created a virus that made Martians burst into flames when they used their psychic powers. Due to this virus, John had to watch his wife, his child, and everyone he ever knew burst into flames. When a scientist on Earth attempted to make contact with Mars with the use of a transmitter, it instead transported John to Earth, where he became the hero, Martian Manhunter. He has handled the loss incredibly well, but losing everyone you ever knew in one of the most painful and brutal ways possible is simply a terrible way to live. Number 4. Guardian. James Hudson of Alpha Flight has had a rough go of it. He was raised by a single mother after his father was killed in a knife fight when he was just a child. He never wanted to be a superhero, but after he developed the Alpha Flight program and its chosen leader, Wolverine, left, he had no choice but to step up. His suit's power pack overloaded in Alpha Flight 12, causing him to light on fire in front of his wife and for him to be presumed dead. He was actually transported to a different planet 10,000 years in the past. The alien inhabitants tried to repair him, but confused his power suit for part of him and turned him into a cyborg before putting him in cryosleep and sending him back to Earth. He returned after having been gone for 2 years and was reunited with his wife. Less than 10 issues later, he was forced to sacrifice his life in order to fight Galactus and was considered dead again. He was actually found and captured by the evil Master and brainwashed into becoming a villain against his old team. He overcame this and was finally free to live his life, until he discovered an evil plan from the government and his suit was sabotaged to send him to deep space, making everyone think he was dead again. The government made a younger clone of him that began dating his wife until Hudson came back, only to discover that his wife had broken up with his clone and was now dating his teammate Puck. The clone later died and he was able to win Heather back, and the two had a child. But on the day she was born, a rogue government employee who wanted Heather for himself shot James out of the sky, causing him to break every bone in his body and almost die again. Wolverine gave him a transfusion that helped to heal him, and he was free to live his life, until him, his wife, and his team were killed by the Collective, leaving his daughter to be raised by distant relatives. He and Heather came back to life, but their dangerous lifestyle caused the courts to refuse them custody. Heather was brainwashed by the Master into being a villain, and she killed her relatives to get her baby, causing her to become a wanted fugitive with his child. He eventually tracked them down and put them in a hollow prison where they could be safe and not hunted, but his wife made it clear that she was still leaving him. So for those counting, he's died like 5 times, and every time he comes back to life, his life actually gets way worse than it was before. Number 3. The Hulk. Even before he became the Hulk, Bruce Banner led a pretty miserable life. His father was a violent drunk who would hurt Bruce and ended up killing his mother in front of the young boy. He threatened Bruce until he lied in court, saying that his father didn't do it, but after Brian drunkenly boasted about the crime, he was put in a mental institution. Bruce spent his childhood suffering from mental health issues, and 15 years later, Brian was released into Bruce's care. While visiting his mom's grave on Christmas Eve, Brian attacked Bruce and Bruce pushed him, causing him to crack his head open and die because of the gravestone. Bruce repressed this memory and grew up to be a great scientist. While testing his gamma bomb, Bruce realized that a teenager had wandered onto the test site and got him to safety, getting caught in the blast himself. This changed him so that whenever he became angry, he would transform into the Hulk, a giant green rage monster. He has spent much of his life since then constantly on the run and being hunted like an animal by the US military. Even when he manages to be a hero for a while, it's never long before someone decides he's too dangerous and needs to be taken out. Bruce lives a life on the run with nothing of his own, not even the clothes on his back, which he loses when he transforms. He has managed to develop a support system like his wife and Rick Jones, but between the multiple personalities and the constant battle with supervillains, he has led a pretty rough life. Number 2. Deadpool. Wade Wilson was a Canadian who moved from Canada and joined the Special Forces in the US, and later became a CIA until he fell in love with the mutant Vanessa Carlyle. Things were good for a while until he developed 34 inoperable cancerous tumors. He left Vanessa and returned home to die. He was recruited into the infamous Weapon X program and given a healing factor which caused the cancer cells to multiply, leaving him hideously disfigured. He was sent to a facility for hospice where the villain Ajax tortured him until Wade escaped and became a mercenary again. He was driven insane from all of this and became the Deadpool we all know and love today. Although he can heal from any injury, Wade is constantly put through the ringer, being given some of the worst physical damage and torture that anyone could endure. He has trouble getting other heroes to respect him or treat him well, and had to give up his daughter because he felt that being around her would only put her in danger. He has a good heart, but there are few superheroes who have endured the amount of pain Deadpool has. Well, except of course, number 1, Wolverine. Wolverine was originally James Howlett, a Canadian living in the late 1800s. When he was a young boy, his groundskeeper killed his father and tried to kidnap his mother. His mutation manifested at this moment, with him popping bone claws, which he used to kill the attacker. Turned out, the groundskeeper was his real father, and his mother sent him away before taking her own life with a shotgun. And it just gets worse from there. Wolverine has lived a long life and therefore has seen almost everyone he's ever loved die, including his wife Itsu and Jean Grey multiple times. He spent many years traveling the world until he was subjected to the experiments of the Weapon X program, who gave him his trademark metal claws. In the years after this, he fought many foes and was subjected to pretty much any injury you can think of, be it having his metal skeleton pulled out or being run over by a steamroller. In a more recent example of his terrible life, he was forced to fight a group of killers who were after him called the Mongrels. He killed all of them before he was informed that every member of the team had actually been one of his children that he had conceived during his wandering years. Rough, dude.
Number 10. All of this is prologue. Maybe one of the most powerful losses that I felt in recent history while reading comics came from the event AXE, Judgment Day. Not only is there the initial illusionary loss that our heroes feel, where I actually for a moment thought that they had all been killed by going for the Celestials off switch, only to find out that this was basically a ruse created by the progenitor, but when they actually all physically united to go up against the progenitor in real life and it wasn't an illusion, they failed as well. This all went down in AXE Judgment Day issue number 5, where many were killed as a result of the plan to attack the Celestial altogether and directly head on. Only a few eggs from Krakoa were able to be saved, and so bringing back some of the many who had fallen was a tough choice. For those of you who have no idea what I'm talking about resurrection protocols which are happening on Krakoa, which is the mutant island right now. It left me wondering as well where this story could possibly go next. And I mean, this story was like a roller coaster. It was actually, I really liked Judgment Day. It was a whirlwind. And friends, before we move on to our next spot on this list, if you love what we do here at Top 10 Nerd, and if you love when we talk about brutal moments, be sure to check out our brutal playlist for even more brutality. Number 9. Delicious. Maybe one of the most gruesome fights to have ever happened involving Spider-Man happens against one of my personal favorite villains, Morlun. And yes, I know, there are many people out there that don't like Morlun, but I do like Morlun. What can I say? I am a sucker for vampires, even if they are weird, multiversal, energy vampires that feed on animalistic totemic energy. During the other story, Spider-Man was suffering from a mysterious illness and was weakened. It was during this time that Morlun struck in issue 526 of The Amazing Spider-Man. Not only does he beat Spider-Man to a pulp here, but he also devours one of his eyeballs, plucking it out. Yeah, ouch. And also, if I may add, ew. I also love that for this point I literally took the quote delicious. Number 8. Be true to yourself. Be the best you are able to. Don't ever give anything but your best. This defeat wasn't a straight up defeat per se, but really a lot of that column A with just a hint of column B. During the Crisis on Infinite Earths event in issue number 7 of the event's miniseries, Kara attempts to rescue her cousin Superman from the clutches of the Anti-Monitor. As the Anti-Monitor stands poised to kill him, Kara comes out swinging. Here, Supergirl proved just how fierce she can be and how determined when it came to protecting others. Ultimately, she was defeated and even killed in this fearsome fight, but at least she did succeed in destroying Anti-Monitor's machines here, and with the help of Dr. Light saving Cal. Supergirl sacrificed her life to save her cousin, but her death also served to remind him of his own mortality. Number 7. you'll only be remembered as a madman. Professor X really cannot catch a break. In almost every universe he is in, he dies at some point, and usually pretty terribly. And in the case of the Ultimate Universe, he died by having his neck snapped by Magneto during Ultimatum. But hey, at least he got an on-panel death. Very few were quite so lucky during Ultimatum. Though it does feel weird to call being defeated lucky, but here we are. Xavier's famous last words to Magneto are warning him that he has gone too far, and that regardless of what he thinks he can do, wipe out the entire world as though he were a god, wash the human race from its surface, that he will not win, and in fact will go down in history as another madman. Just another madman. When Xavier compares him to the leader of Germany during World War II, however, the Chancellor of the German Reich, you know who I'm talking about, that causes Magneto to snap, which makes sense given Magneto's history. He snapped Xavier's neck in response, so while Magneto would not ultimately win the greater war here, he would win this battle at least, pretty permanently, because you know, Xavier's dead. Number 6. What a lucky man I was. I think the wild thing here is how little is said or thought in this fight. Well, I mean, there are no thought bubbles. I'm sure people are thinking, but we don't get to know what they are because, you know, this defeat comes from the battle between Superman and Doomsday, but in the animated film, The Death of Superman. So yeah, no thought bubbles here. The fight here between Superman and Doomsday somehow comes across as even more brutal and devastating to me than in the comics. Superman is choked by his own cape at one point, which Doomsday rips in the process, and when Superman is ready to give up, it is Doomsday's direct threat to Lois Lane, who tosses a rock at the brute in the midst of the fight, brave Lois Lane, that inspires Superman to get up one last time. Lois shares that she got Clark's note, and she confesses that she shares his feelings and actually loves him back. Not willing to see the woman he loves die, Superman takes one final swing at Doomsday and manages to break his neck, twisting his head all the way around, killing him. However, this final punch also seals Superman's fate, using his last bit of strength before he too perishes. In the comments on part 1, someone actually talked about how Superman's death here while fighting and defeating Doomsday in any of the versions of this story could be seen as a victory because he did accomplish what he set out to do. And while I agree with that sentiment, because yeah, Superman does defeat Doomsday, Doomsday also robs Metropolis and the world of one of its most powerful heroes during this fight. And so in that way, Superman is kind of also defeated. I mean, he loses his life, so it's kind of like a two-way defeat when you think about it. It's bittersweet, which to me sums up what a brutal defeat is. It's something that is often hard to watch and something that comes with usually a pretty high cost.
Number 5. The Heretic. The 2012 volume of Batman Incorporated is full of some just bizarre moments. This is happening at a time when Batman has taken on his newfound son, Damian Wayne, as his Robin. The relationship is strenuous at best. It's bound to happen when the dad is a brooding, unemotionally available masked man who runs around beating up criminals, and the surprise son, who was raised to be one of the deadliest assassins in the world, is dumped on Batman by a woman who had chemically manipulated him into conceiving the kid in the first place, if you know what I mean. While these two were trying to find a balance in their relationship, Talia al Ghul, the aforementioned mother, initiated a plot to take over Gotham alongside her organization and with a massive hulking bodyguard called the Heretic. Spoilers for a story that is about 10 years old, but the Heretic is actually a clone of Damian Wayne himself, and he is terrifying. For starters, he was literally grown inside the belly of a whale, which, what? But in some of his most brutal moments, Heretic ties a group of hostages to a massive boulder and then throws the boulder down a flight of stairs. He quite literally single-handedly takes the life of Knight and fights off members of Batman Incorporated using the hero's body as a weapon. But when he comes face to face with Damian Robin and Nightwing, he takes out Nightwing in one move, and although Robin actually puts up a really good fight, Heretic still runs him through with a massive sword, bringing the end for Batman's son. Number 4. Vampire Batman. When Dracula comes to Gotham, a good vampire grants Batman the vampiric gift in order to take on Dracula himself. And the idea was so awesome that it became a whole brutal trilogy. Starting with Red Rain, then Bloodstorm, and ending in Batman Crimson Mist. All of which put the most obvious hero to become a vampire in one of the best Victorian horror styles and with the most terrifying looks I have ever seen for the Dark Knight. In the first novel, Red Rain, the hero wipes out the vampires and Dracula, although he is transformed into a vampire himself at the end, which means we get to see Batman take on crime using the powers of a vampire in the next novel, Bloodstorm. He does his bestest to resist the darker aspects of being a vampire, but that all goes south when Batman lashes out and drains the Joker's blood after the Joker ended the life of Catwoman. Batman has Alfred and Gordon stake him through the heart, putting Batman into a catatonic state. A state that he is then revived from in Batman Crimson Mist, when criminals took over Gotham in his absence. This time around, the Vampire Knight is almost completely animalistic now thanks to his isolation. A bloodthirsty vampire Batman quickly wipes out most of his enemies in brutal form, drinking their blood in the process until he is finally put to rest by Alfred, Gordon, Two-Face, and Killer Croc, who all go with him to the grave. Number 3. Arkham Asylum. One of the great things about Batman compared to any other hero is the way his comics can lean really heavily on the darker aspects of human beings, and because of that they can also get away with much more expressionistic art that can be really gorgeous while also being completely terrifying. As example, let's talk about Arkham Asylum. The gritty gothic artwork, which looks like it came straight out of my nightmares, meshes with the extremely dark, disturbing, supernatural themes of the story to take what is essentially just Batman going to work to secure Arkham Asylum into a brutal, mind-twisting funhouse ride. It's terrifying. Batman takes on some of his most well-known foes, but the fights aren't the compelling part. It's the sheer freakiness of it all. The real brutality of this story comes in its horror and the dark past of Arkham Asylum itself, which is slowly drip-fed to us as we make our way through the pages and pages of the most terrifying Joker I have ever seen. And at number 2, All-Star Batman. Remember before when I said that Batman puts the most brutal beatdowns on his opponents? Well, let's talk about a group of thugs in the All-Star Batman and Robin series, specifically issue number 7. Written by Frank Miller, we can expect that this Batman will be a little bit rougher around the edges, but I don't think any of us ever expected him to be like this. In fact, this whole series is full of brutal Batman moments that honestly make him feel like a totally different character. I have talked about this before, and thank you Rodney for informing me of this, but in the opening pages of issue number 7, Batman comes speeding into a group of armed thugs, foot first, laughing like the Joker and talking in his head about how Gotham is full of cockroaches. He's basically delighted at the fact that the criminals are so scared that they are accidentally disposing of each other. But then, on top of all of that, he sets fire to a bottle of bleach and tosses it onto the criminals, blanketing them in fire. And then he continues beating the snot out of them while they're getting crispy. This is no longer the Batman. There's no way, but wait, there's more. Because Black Canary then pops up out of nowhere and these two superheroes just start making out and getting busy while the thugs are barbecuing in the background. It's messed up. And finally, in at number 1, his parents! Everyone and their moms knew this was going to be on the list. It's the whole reason Batman is Batman. The tragic passing of Thomas and Martha Wayne at the hands of Joe Chill remains the defining moment in Batman's life. It's brought up so often that you think it's basically his whole personality, and in a way, it actually kinda is. The loss of his parents has informed almost everything he has done going forward, from his decision to even become Batman, to the fact that he has such weird father-child relationships with his wards. He has paid multiple visits to Joe Chill to try and teach the man the error of his ways, and to show him what he created. He's almost constantly reminded of their loss, if not by villains who know the truth, then by his own Bat family. Bruce Wayne may have grown up to become one of the greatest detectives and superheroes in the world, but he will pretty much always just be the scared little boy in an alleyway mourning the loss of his parents. And that sucks.
Number 10, Invincible vs. Conquest. Goodness. Invincible has a slew of fights that are extremely brutal and brilliant. I mean, their brutality is a huge part of what makes them so brilliant. This is a series that knows and understands the importance of creating stakes, both physical and emotional ones, for its characters. While I considered talking about the fight between Mark and his dad Omni-Man on the first part of this list, or honestly any of the other amazing fights that happen in Invincible to be honest, as I said there are so many, I would like to specifically thank Vaughn Soso for suggesting this one. This is the fight that happens between Conquest and Invincible. When Conquest first arrives on Earth and demands that Invincible take responsibility as the Viltrumite liaison stationed there to basically get the planet ready for conquering. Mark at this point has just gone through hell and back and basically blames himself for all of the terrible things that have happened on Earth recently. So he's not really in a great mood and is filled with anger, resentment, and sadness for all that he's lost, and decides to take on Conquest. Overall, honestly, not a great move, which Mark learns once he finds out just how powerful Conquest is. Probably one of the toughest enemies he's ever faced at this point, which is kind of par for the course for Invincible, because I feel like every time Mark faces someone, he's like, well, I've done a lot of things, and then he's always like, dang, how is this person even more powerful? How is that possible? Honestly, it's saying something, because at this point in the story, Mark has faced like a lot of tough opponents, including a whole army made up of evil versions of himself. The fight gets even more brutal when Adam Eve comes in to help, having literally flown up off a hospital bed where she was currently healing herself to do so. And I know what you all are thinking, wow, Amanda, what a number 10 spot. This is a crazy fight. But yeah, that's all part of the drawing you in, because we got a lot more crazy fights coming up, even though this one might actually be one of our craziest. But wait for that number 1 spot, that one's wild. And friends, before we move on to our next spot on this list, if you love what we do here at Top 10 Nerd, be sure to show us by clicking that like button. Number 9, Deadpool vs. Black Box and Black Tom. I still can't believe how close Deadpool came to dying in this fight, and the real crazy part is it wasn't even the villains really who put him in that situation. They were more like the catalysts for him putting himself in danger as he fought against them both. This one comes to us from Daniel Way's run on Deadpool, which happened back in 2008. Here at one point, Deadpool becomes cured of his mutation. With his healing factor gone, he is turned back into handsome Wade Wilson, but at the same time a big target is of course placed on his head when those he has royally pissed off in the past basically realize he's now very killable. 2 people who end up coming for him are the villains Black Box and Black Tom, and to fight their fire, Deadpool decides to use some of his own fire, using literal fire, using a lighter and basically gasoline to create his own flamethrower. However, while he wins the fight, or while he survives the fight at least, I would call it a win for Deadpool here, he ends up pretty badly injured after setting himself on fire during it. He gets a little too excited with that sort of gas station flamethrower he made, and also, you shouldn't do that at a gas station, as we learned in that comic. Number 8, Superboy Prime vs. The Darkest Knight. This one is brutal in a way that pulls at my heartstrings. This fight happens in the comic Dark Knight's Death Metal: The Secret Origins. While the fight itself is pretty short, the emotional and character building implications for it are powerful. The emotional stakes here are high. Superboy Prime ends up facing off against the Darkest Knight in the hopes of defeating him and helping to basically save the multiverse. Now, while he doesn't completely succeed here, he does help turn the tides for his fellow heroes, and this story provides a great redemption arc for Superboy Prime, who was once a hero, basically turned into a massive villain, all because he suffered the heartache of losing his world. While facing off against the Darkest Knight, Superboy Prime is basically offered to be spared and even join up with the Knight's own army of Supermen. He sees a vision of a life he could have in the future where he is once more a hero, fighting alongside his other heroic colleagues if he decides to, join up with the Darkest Knight, who can give him that reality. However, he acknowledges that this would still not be the world he lost, noting that both his parents and Lori would still be absent here. Tempted, Superboy is grounded in reality suddenly by the reappearance of Crypto, and ends up refusing the offer, fighting against the Darkest Knight and giving his life in doing so. While the battle is not finished yet, this is a crucial moment where the tides turn for our heroes, weakening the darkness and allowing the heroes to basically rise up and end up winning the day. It is then confirmed that Superboy Prime did indeed die as a result of fighting back. However, he either gets his world back through his journey into the afterlife, or possibly through the multiverse's reconstruction following the resolution of death metal. So he's either dead and then he's brought back, or he's dead and he's in the afterlife and he just kind of gets a little happy ending in the afterlife. Number 7, Dazzler vs. Techmaster. One of the most brutal things you can do to a character, we all know, is not to just throw them brutally across a room into a wall, but literally throw them so forcefully that it looks like they were simply drawn sideways in a fight. Like someone took that figure and rotated it, which is what happens in this comic. And I was like, wow, that's bad. Look at Dazzler go, she's literally like this. That's what happened to Dazzler when she faced off against Techmaster. Well, Techmaster is very much, I would say, a lesser known villain, having only appeared in about a handful of issues during his time in the comics. This fight still personally had me on the edge of my seat. Honestly, a lot of classic stories have me on the edge of my seat. I just feel like the suspense just feels so heightened. While Dazzler usually pulls out all her bells and whistles in a fight, in this one she has her special portable radio made by Reed Richards, Mr. Fantastic of the Fantastic Four, destroyed, and ultimately it comes down to basically kind of like fisticuffs, as Dazzler fights desperately for survival here. She does win and even almost causes the death of her opponent as he tumbles backwards and falls over a railing. However, her manager, Harry Osgood, manages to rush in at the last minute and save the villain from certain doom, and with his life saved, Techmaster basically decides to make peace with both his rival Harry and with Harry's talent, Alison Blair. So, all kind of works out in the end. Number 6. Batman vs. Reverse Flash. This fight was heart-wrenching for so many reasons, and pretty much perfectly encapsulates the kind of fights I'm excited to highlight here on this list, let me tell you. In Batman issue number 21 from the 2016 comic, part of the Button story, Batman is forced to fight against an enemy who pretty much completely outranks him, the Reverse Flash. We see him get brutally attacked, and while it seems like there is no way Batman can win here, we later learn that being the smart man that he is, Batman himself knew that, and so he'd kind of already won, simply by accepting the fact that if he fought directly, he would lose, and knowing that his best bet would actually be basically to stall until the Flash returned, which ended up being a successful and life-saving strategy actually. Although I mean, in the end the Flash was still a little late, but it worked out, so yeah, and it was brutal, so it ranks. Number 5. Yeah, I always get up. Man, when it comes to tragic Spider-Man deaths, for a guy that seems to always survive just about anything, we sure have a lot of those. And Into the Spider-Verse, there are multiple Spider-Men and women, Spider-Folks as I like to say, and the reality of Miles Morales, he is Spider-Man, but even in his reality, there was a Peter Parker who was the original Spider-Man. Tragically, almost as soon as Miles gets to know him and he sees that Miles also has spider-like abilities, he's gone, leaving Miles without a mentor until he meets the alternate reality Peter B. Parker. Peter dies while trying to stop Kingpin's plot to open up portals to other dimensions, in the hopes of reviving the family that he lost. After passing on a USB key, or a goober, as it is called by Peter B, to Miles to use it to stop the collider, Kingpin and Prowler confront Spider-Man, and when Peter warns Kingpin that his plan will both destroy the world and ultimately fail in the process, or I mean at least destroy New York here, Kingpin loses his cool, slamming his fists into an already exhausted Spider-Man's chest, killing him. Number 4. This is going to hurt you a lot more than it does me. Famous words that come from Joker before he brutally attacks Jason Todd with a crowbar. This all went down in the Batman story A Death in the Family. Fans at the time were able to vote on whether or not Jason Todd would live or die. After the brutal attack on his life in issue 427 that ends with an explosion going off which buries Jason's body in rubble, in issue number 428 we'd get our answer to that fateful question, and ultimately it would be established that Jason had, in fact, died. Although much later on we learned this wasn't quite true when he seemingly returned from the dead years later as the antagonistic anti-hero Red Hood. Number 3. You losing your cool, Brucey? This is probably one of the most brutal in terms of the devastation that was physically wrought here. For this point we're talking about Wolverine versus Hulk, but in the Ultimate Universe. And you know it's going to be brutal because it's the Ultimate Universe. Wolverine was tasked with hunting down Hulk for fury, but when he finally does find Hulk, Hulk remarks on how he really doesn't want to be found, also proving that, you know, he doesn't really need to be disturbed because he's actually calm, he's intelligent now, and at that time of no danger really to anyone. At least not in that moment. So long as they don't, of course, goad him into getting angry, of course, which, you guessed it, Wolverine purposefully does here. In response, Hulk and Wolverine begin to fight, and eventually Hulk rips Wolverine in half. And once Wolverine manages to climb a mountain to recover his legs, his lower half of his body, Hulk then threatens to eat one of Logan's legs. Ultimate Universe, why you like this? Fortunately, this pretty brutal defeat of Wolverine is interrupted by She-Hulk, who in this universe is actually Betty Ross. Number 2. What's 17 more years? While Think Mark became one of the most famous and memeable lines from this superhero defeat and animated series, I would say in general, one of the most brutal moments in this fight happens when Omni-Man suggests that he could basically just destroy Mark, literally kill him with his own hands, and you know, just make another child if he has to. Asking rhetorically, what's 17 more years? For him as a Viltrumite, his lifespan is of course much longer than a human, so to him 17 years is basically nothing, a very short span of time. However, reducing his emotional connection that has been built up with his son over 17 years to something so seemingly meaningless, as though none of it really meant anything, makes the beating that Mark takes here just even more brutal. Granted, in the greater scheme of things, we know it isn't this simple for Omni-Man, who, it is revealed, does love his son and is unable to actually swing the killing blow, probably because of that. So, number 1. It was a nice piece of work, Kingpin. You shouldn't have signed it. It doesn't get more awful than this defeat right here. This one happened as a greater part of the famous Daredevil story Born Again. In issue number 227 of Daredevil, we are told the story titled appropriately Apocalypse. And indeed, if you are Matt Murdock, it would certainly feel like the apocalypse. Here, Kingpin finds out Daredevil's secret identity and uses it not to simply kill him, but instead to destroy his entire life. First, he comes for his law practice, making it seem as though Matt bribed a witness in a case. But he doesn't stop there. He comes after his finances, his sanity, and even blows up his apartment, and in the process, destroys his costume. However, while DD is left feeling pretty defeated by that point of the whole thing when his apartment goes boom at the end of this issue, he at least now has a name to pin this all on, seeing it all as the work of none other than Kingpin. So that's a plus, I would say. At least he has like a vendetta now. Keep him going. Number 10. Taskmaster versus Hyperion. This one is wild, especially when you consider the beating the Taskmaster was allowing himself to take just to get this fight done. And yet he did manage to get it done, and impressively so. We get to learn about how he actually had this one in the bag through flashbacks we are shown during the fight, where it's revealed that Taskmaster's preparation was the key. Now, it might seem weird that I'm considering Taskmaster to be the hero in this case, but based on what we learn about Phil Coulson's Squadron Supreme in the 2021 Heroes Reborn event, and that whole thing with Mephisto, it really does make sense based on that. In the Taskmaster series in issue number 2, Taskmaster is working with Nick Fury to clear his name, but Tony Masters has to do something for Fury first. He needs to collect the kinesic signatures of 3 important individuals, one of whom is Phil Coulson. But to get to him, he has to go through Hyperion. And in order to do that, he has to first bring Hyperion's guard down, in essence allowing Hyperion to punch his way through Taskmaster. Ouch! Taskmaster, through feigning a loss though, is able to get Hyperion to drop his guard enough to get a single, powerful boomerang arrow shot out. A Hawkeye classic that is tipped with Hyperion's one weakness based on Fury's intel: radioactive Argonite, which is basically like Hyperion's like kryptonite, so yeah. Alright friends, before we move on to this next spot on our list, if you love what we do here at Top 10 Nerd, why not show us you love us by clicking that subscribe button? I know there's a lot of you out there that aren't subscribed. I'm looking at you. You're not subscribed. Go click it. Do it. I'm gonna wait. Okay. Thank you. Number 9. Dream vs. Karanzan. One of my favorite fights I've ever read in any book, comic, or otherwise happens in the Sandman series, where many of my favorite things happen in comics because it's one of my favorite stories of all time. If you've watched my videos on Nerd here regularly over the years, you may also know that this comic is one of my favorite stories of all time because anytime I can talk about it, I love to talk about it. The original comic, of course, from the 90s is what we're talking about here, and the fight that happens in it happens during the first arc in the series when Dream is tasked with reclaiming his symbols of office, namely here his helm, which it turns out is currently in the possession of a demon in hell. In order to get back his helm in the comics, he must do battle with and beat the demon currently in possession of it, one of Beelzebub's, a demon named Karanzan. This battle is described as being the oldest game and is in essence a battle of imagination. One can lose through hesitation, inability to take up a solid defensive stance, and of course, lack of imagination. In the Sandman live action series, this is the battle we see that takes place instead between Lucifer and Dream. However, in the comics, it is Karanzan that conjures up the anti-life in the hopes of finally beating Dream. While initially Dream is badly beaten by Karanzan's move, he ends up winning in the end, proving himself really the ruler of imagination, as what else are dreams really, by conjuring up the concept of hope, which obviously can be pretty much everything. Some people might not consider Lord Morpheus a superhero, but I would consider his tale overall to be one similar to that of a heroic epic. And for that reason, and his capacity to do great good when he so chooses, I'm gonna include him here. Number 8. Moon Knight vs. Raoul Bushman. So many of the most brutal fights in comics I feel like come from the time period that this comic does, the early 2000s. One of the most edgy times other than the 90s. In Moon Knight issue number 2 from the 2006 volume volume, Moon Knight takes on and brutally defeats Raoul Bushman. But even before we get to the brutal yet victorious literal face-off moment, stakes are established here, with Moon Knight being pushed off of a rooftop and falling to his doom, or seemingly falling to his doom, smashing his knees as he goes, and therefore unable to get up to defend himself really when Bushman comes down to finish the job. Fortunately, Moon Knight has his crescent moon darts, and uses these to bring Bushman down to his level so he can crawl over to him and finish the job. Number 7. Black Panther vs. Namor. Probably one of the most brutal fights I've ever seen on screen in the Marvel Cinematic Universe comes to us from the recent Black Panther sequel, Wakanda Forever. That's right, we're going to the MCU, baby! In this film, it is T'Challa's sister Shuri who takes up the mantle of Black Panther after her brother passes away, which was changed in the script after the real-world death of Chadwick Boseman, who initially played Black Panther, Prince turned King T'Challa in the first film and in the MCU. Shuri here takes up the mantle as a last resort to reconnect with the family she has lost, but also because she knows it is the only way she will be able to fight against the newly introduced and complex antagonist in this movie, Namor, the Submariner, or Namor if you prefer. I love the way that it's said in this movie, Namor. When the two do come to blows, after Shuri does successfully recreate the heart-shaped herb and becomes Black Panther, Shuri also uses her smarts to take advantage of Namor's weaknesses, creating a device to dry him out, which she places in one of her ships and activates during the fight against the famed Talokan. During the fight, the airship crash lands on a desert-looking beach. It looks real crispy down there, I gotta say. And the two continue their bloody fight, both almost dying as Shuri attempts to prevent Namor from getting back into the water. Through the course of their fight, Black Panther rips off one of Namor's ankle wings, which allows him to fly, and Namor at one point skewers her with a part of the wreckage. Or a spear, I'm not really sure what it is. It looks like a spear, but he also kind of grabbed it from where like the wreckage was. Maybe there were spears on the ship, who knows. Number 6. Thor vs. Kull Borson. Also known as the Serpent and the God of Fear, Kull Borson is actually Thor's uncle, but that didn't stop these two from fighting one another. In fact, their fight was in essence destined to happen. It had to happen, and Thor was fated to die in this battle against his uncle. Odin had attempted to keep Thor safe from this prophecy by locking Kull away years ago. Kull was once actually the rightful ruler of Asgard, the Allfather, but Odin was forced to overthrow his brother after Kull became obsessed with striking fear into both the hearts of his enemies and even kind of his allies. Odin locked Kull away deep beneath the sea, hoping to keep him from ever becoming powerful enough to rise again after he learned that the serpent was prophesied to kill his son. However, even doing this cannot prevent the prophecy from coming to pass. Eventually, Kull would rise up, powered by the fears of the people of Midgard, and choose his own champions, awarding them great power and each their own hammer. Thor would learn the truth of his uncle, and with the Avengers do battle against him and his army, dying as predicted in the fight against his uncle, but fortunately defeating him too. However, this is also comics, so both Kull and Thor would eventually return, despite their epic showdown and its seemingly permanent results. Number 5. Punisher vs. Wolverine. I mean, these two are both superheroes, which is maybe what makes the fight so much more brutal. This one happened during Garth Ennis's and Derek Robertson's time on Punisher. Here, Punisher and Wolverine end up in a kind of a reluctant team-up, or a team-up gone wrong, I would say, when Wolverine questions Punisher's methods here. As a result, to prevent Wolverine from hunting him down, or at least to kind of like slow Wolverine down because, you know, it's pretty unkillable, Punisher resorts to all kinds of brutal tactics, including shooting Wolverine point blank in the face with a shotgun, allowing him to have his limbs basically sawed off, attacking him below the belt, and steamrolling him. Literally, he got steamrolled. He got a steamroller and he ran Wolverine over. Boy. Wolverine of course survives all this mistreatment, but it's still a brutal read, and it's brutal in like a lot of ways to me. Definitely a brutal fight. Number 4. Batman vs. the Joker. During the events of Endgame, no, not the Marvel Endgame, the comic story from Batman Endgame, Joker and Batman essentially end up trying to straight up murder one another, or at least from a reader standpoint, that's basically what it seems like. Well, Joker at this point boasts of a healing factor that he claims he received hundreds of years before due to him being like basically this ancient being, far more ancient than Batman could have ever imagined. It's revealed through the course of their fight that, you know, this is probably not true, as Batman ends up successfully nullifying Joker's abilities in a way that reveals he only recently probably stumbled upon these powers and is definitely not as old as he claims and is just trying to mess with Batman, which honestly is the Joker way. Number 3. Conan vs. Kulan Gath. Just when you think Conan is going to take this one, the script gets flipped flipped on you. This fight comes to us from Savage Avengers issue number 25, so good. Here, Kulan Gath faces off against Conan, who has come back to battle this fiend with the help of Kang. So you would think, with the impressive arsenal Kang has at his fingertips, that Conan would have this, right? Well, this is Kulan Gath, probably at his most powerful. He is the ruler of the world here, and even though Conan manages to maim him, he's not able to defeat him in hand-to-sorcery combat in this issue. Though of course there is a greater plan at work here which ends up balancing the scales in Conan's favor in the end, but during this issue we don't really get to see that. Instead we focus on this bloody and gruesome battle fought with magic, energy weapons, armor, swords, symbiotes, and sharp fingernails. Deadly sharp, if I may add. Number 2, Superman vs. Doomsday. Superman and Doomsday have an iconic fight that many of us know from the famous story Death of Superman. Now, if you've already watched my part 1 to this list, then this fight actually might remind you of another one I talked about over there. And if you haven't watched part 1 yet, be sure to do that after you finish this video, because we have even more brutal superhero fights waiting for you over there. And if you have already watched it, you can guess below which fight I'm referring to as to which one is kind of similar to this Superman vs. Doomsday fight. In this fight, Superman gives up his life to basically defeat Doomsday. This works with Doomsday perishing alongside Superman, ushering in the mourning period that would follow for Earth's greatest hero. But while there were those who could not believe what they were reading at the time that this story came out, this shocking moment at least would not end up being quite so frighteningly permanent, with Clark Kent later being resurrected. Even when you go back and read this, it's very powerful, it's very emotional. Number 1, Miracle Man vs. Kid Miracle Man. Whew! This is a brutal one. Thanks to Michael Lavender for suggesting this one in the comments. I honestly do not think of Miracle Man often enough in my day-to-day. When I'm talking about comics, the Miracle Man is something that exists sort of near the back of my mind. So thank you so much for suggesting this one, because now I get to talk about Miracle Man, which is just a great time. Talk about a character and a story and a fight. Rather, this one is honestly more of a massacre by the end. Less of a fight, more of just a brutal massacre. It's true that this is probably one of the most brutal superhero fights in all of comics history, I would say. And I'm actually sad that I didn't include this on my part 1, but you know what? It doesn't have to be the most brutal, it just had to be some brutal fights. So it's still good, and now we can come back to it over here and I can give it a top spot. We're going back to issue number 15 of Miracle Man to talk about this one from the 80s, although it was also reprinted in 2014, so if you see it looking a little bit more modern here, it might just be because we used that art in this video instead, which is actually also from Toddle Ben, so it's same artist, just they also redid it. And I would still say that I think this story has some of the most captivating and gruesome artwork I've ever seen in a comic, courtesy of Toddle Ben himself. In this tragic tale, Miracle Man is forced to fight against his former sidekick, Kid Miracle Man, who is now all grown up. Well, at least his Kid Miracle Man form is. Having lived in this form for years, he aged and also became insane. After transforming back into his human form of Johnny Bates initially after years of being Kid Miracle Man, who was now an adult and was basically crazed with power, he was traumatized to learn of all the horrible things that he had done in that form. So he was put into an orphanage with the hopes that, being around other kids his age might help him to drown out the voice of Kid Miracle Man that still plagued his mind and was kind of living in there. However, after being tormented by the other kids and suffering from SA, Johnny ended up saying the magical name of Miracle Man, transforming back into Kid Miracle Man and unleashing him on the world. Thousands, 40,000 people were killed in the massacre that ensued after this transformation, and in the end, Miracle Man got lucky when Kid Miracle Man was forced to say the magical word once more to escape the pain of the injuries he'd suffered in battle. Also, this battle, I should admit, took pretty much everyone to even just get him to turn back, so that's wild. Knowing that there was likely no way to save Johnny from his evil alter ego, and therefore no way to prevent this kind of awful massacre from happening again, potentially in the future, Miracle Man was then forced to offer Johnny a sense of comfort, holding Johnny's head before he basically crushes it in his hand. I have trauma just from reliving the story and rereading it.
Number 10, Rorschach. Walter Kovacs had a pretty rough upbringing, being raised by a less than ideal mother before being made a ward of the state. He was bullied there too, although through his schooling it was discovered that he was an extremely intelligent boy with a real skill at boxing. When he grew up, he became a garment worker until the murder of a woman woman who was killed in front of several witnesses, who all didn't even try to help her, inspired him to become a costumed crime fighter. He used a special fabric that changed with temperature and pressure to make a mask for himself, and he became Rorschach. Rorschach was a decently respected hero, even working with the other heroes as a member of the hero team the Crime Busters, but after seeing a particularly cruel and disturbing crime scene, his mind snapped, and the Walter Kovacs side of him died, leaving only the brutal Rorschach. Rorschach has been known to treat the criminal element with complete disdain and cruelty, having no qualms about using intense violence in his interrogations, like when he crushed a drinking glass in a man's hands. He is lethal to his enemies, having dropped men down elevator shafts, set men on fire, burned them with cooking oil, electrocuted them, and drowned them in toilets without showing the slightest bit of remorse. Number 9. Wolverine. You know who Wolverine is. He's the fuzzy Canadian with a healing factor who was experimented on by the Weapon X program and given adamantium claws. He has been a member of several superhero teams such as the X-Men, X-Force, and the Avengers, but he is much more brutal than a lot of his teammates. I mean, he has knives coming out of his hands. That obviously makes him pretty brutal, but considering this, he does try to restrain himself from being too violent. Unfortunately for his enemies, he has a tendency to fly into a berserker rage where he becomes a flurry of claws and anger. I could sit here and tell you specific examples of his brutality, but pretty much all of them just boil down to him using his claws to leave rooms full of corpses that have been cut into a bunch of tiny pieces. Number 8. Spawn. Al Francis Simmons was a mercenary for the US government before being killed by one of his fellow mercenaries. Due to all the murder, Al was sent to hell, but he made a deal with a demon named Malbolgia and agreed to join Hell's army as a Hellspawn. He was sent back to Earth, where he discovered that 5 years had passed and that his wife had remarried and started a new life with his best friend. So he became Spawn and spent the rest of his time brutally dispatching violent criminals and fighting evil demons. He can use his demonic powers to go up against his enemies, but he is just as likely to use his bare hands to straight up tear people in half, or in one case, stab someone to death with an ice cream scoop. Number 7. Dog Welder. Dog Welder is a member of the DC Super Team Section 8, which consists of some of the intentionally worst superheroes in comic book history. There is Six-Pack, who is a drunk man who attacks people with a bottle, Defenestrator, who carries around a window pane that he breaks over people's heads, or Bueno Excelente, who, well, the less said about him the better. One of the more brutal members of this lame team is the Dog Welder. He never speaks, and his whole deal is setting up traps in alleyways to capture and euthanize dogs. He then carries around the dead dogs until he comes across a villain. Then, he uses his welding torch to weld the dog to the villain's face. That's it. That's his whole deal. And he has only made 6 appearances in the history of DC, although, in one of them, he did weld a dog to Lobo's butt. Number 6. Moon Knight. When Mark Spector was a child, he discovered that his rabbi was actually a former German SS officer who had deserted at the end of the war and was posing as a rabbi in order to end the lives of members of the local Jewish community. Mark escaped, but the trauma of this caused him to develop dissociative identity disorder. His first alters were Stephen Grant, who invested Mark's meager funds and became a millionaire who funds their superhero activities, and Jake Lockley, a rough and tumble cabbie who uses his position to gather intel on the various crimes going on. Mark became a mercenary, and after having been critically injured, made a deal with the god Khonshu to become his fist and punish evildoers in his name. He developed the superhero personas of Moon Knight as well as Mr. Knight, who is also a hero but wears a posh white suit rather than a big white cloak. Moon Knight can be brutal with his enemies, often branding them with his logo or straight up killing them. Some of his worst moments include gouging the villain Truth's eyes out, or ending his battle with Raoul Bushman by cutting off the guy's face.
Number 5. Harley Quinn versus the Joker. While some still might think of Harley Quinn as a villain, this all happened, I would say, around the time of her turning point from kind of villain into hero. It's kind of when it's all going down. And while the road has been long, I would say at this point in time, at the time of this recording right now, despite only a few years before being declared Villain of the Year, that Harley is more hero than villain right now in her history. So yeah. This fight happened, however, quite a while ago now, but Harley was still enjoying acting somewhat heroically, at least, as part of the Suicide Squad, and coming into her own really as a character, or continuing to come into her own, I would say. In Suicide Squad issue number 15, she faces off with the Joker in one of the most brutal fights I have ever read. And while the Joker technically kind of wins this fight, Harley wins the battle, managing to escape with her life after he locks her up and threatens to leave her there to starve to death with all the corpses of the supposed Harleys who came before her. There is so much about this fight that I cannot talk about in detail because we're on YouTube, but just trust me, it's just because it's also literally that brutal. So if you want to read a brutal fight, check it out. Number 4, Spider-Man vs. Green Goblin. This one ended in seeming death for both parties, and it doesn't get more brutal than that. Add in the fact that Peter Parker was also unmasked during the fight and had his loved ones and neighborhood watching him get basically beaten into oblivion, and it creates a pretty intense picture in your mind and in your heart. Or, well, yeah, I mean, you don't even really need to create a picture of it in your mind because this comes from the Ultimate Comics, and of course, they provide the pictures for you because it's a comic book. And what a brutal picture they do paint. This fight isn't just brutal in a physical sense, although it is also that, with Peter smashing a hulking Green Goblin with basically a semi-truck at one point, but it's also brutal in the emotional sense, because it ends with Peter's apparent death. And I mean also Goblin's apparent death. But of course, I'm much less broken up about Green Goblin dying here. No one cares. Norman, you deserved it. In fact, I kind of feel relieved at that part. While this wouldn't be the end for either character, this battle is still one that stands out to me as one with heightened stakes, where the characters feel right on the precipice of death almost throughout, until they actually and tragically cross over to the other side. Number 3, Batman vs. Superman. An iconic fight in the comics that made its way to the big screen. Granted, on the big screen, I don't know how iconic this fight was for me, but at the end of the day, the fact that it even made it there just goes to show the impact it had on readers. This fight doesn't even come from the main continuity, hailing instead from Frank Miller's The Dark Knight Returns continuity of Earth 31. But it was so brutal and impactful that it was still incorporated into the main continuity, or the likely, I guess, to be former main continuity of the DCEU. Here, two heroes fight against one another, and one of them doesn't even have any powers to speak of. Batman at this point is not only still powerless, but is also, or I guess was also, retired. He returns from retirement, however, and as a result, Superman is basically tasked with taking him out by the President. But Batman isn't prepared to go down without a fight, and a bloody, brutal, and desperate battle ensues between the two at the end of the story that we later find out Batman seemingly won in his own sly Batman way. While Batman seemingly dies and is unable to finish the fight, with the strain being too much on his heart and him collapsing, we later learn at the funeral that he is still alive and well, and that Clark may have even been in on this ploy. At the very least, he seems to be in on it by the end of the story. Number 2, Hawkeye vs. the Liberators. As you'd expect, this list wouldn't be much without me diving into the world of the Ultimates. And what a perfect time for it too, as the Ultimate line is due to make its return in comics this year. There's so many brutal fights in the Ultimates, with Jonathan Hickman heading the return of the Ultimates line. Like many, I too am excited about this, so I thought why not dive back into some of the most brutal Ultimates fights we've ever witnessed. This one comes to us from before Jonathan Hickman's time working on the line, but was delivered to us by the dynamic and often brutal duo of Mark Miller and Brian Hitch. And Brian Hitch will be returning, so fun facts. It does fit right in on this list because it's just that brutal. The fight happened after Hawkeye of the Ultimates team was kidnapped by the Liberators. After learning of what happened to his family and being mocked, tormented, and questioned, Hawkeye finally manages to strike back against his captors with the only weapon he has at the time, his fingernails. And we're not talking about Clint clawing his way out of this. Oh no, we're talking about him using his fingernails as projectiles when combined with his deadly accuracy, which basically allow him to take out an entire group of Liberators and successfully escape. He kills people with his fingernails. Number 1, Mera vs. Aquaman. Mera and Aquaman are often presented as being romantic partners, and sometimes as a crime-fighting Atlantean duo as well. However, this doesn't mean that they never fight, and during the Blackest Night they actually had some pretty good reason to. At that time, Aquaman had been possessed by the Black Lanterns, joining their forces, and Mera was driven into a rage by the death of the last standing family member she had, Tempest, causing her to become a Red Lantern. During one page in Green Lantern issue number 50 from the 2005 volume of that series, Mera takes on the deceased Arthur Curry, and when he attempts to win her over through what I can only describe as weird kind of empathy. I imagine trying to distract her from her rage by attempting to bond with her over the loss of their son. This, however, fails to work, and Mara frightens him off masterfully, responding, "I never wanted children," before seemingly killing them both with her blood, which as a Red Lantern was transformed at the time into liquid napalm, because that's how it be for Red Lanterns.